whistle at night. At first, I thought it was just another one of those old superstitions my grandmother liked to preach. Growing up in a bustling city, far removed from the traditions of our village, I never gave her words much thought. But life has a way of pulling you back to your roots, sometimes violently. It was 2 months ago when I received the call. My grandmother had passed, and I was the only one in the family able to take time off to handle her affairs. That's how I ended up in her remote village in Southeast Asia, a place I'd only visited once as a child. The village was small, nestled between thick jungle and rice paddies that seemed to stretch on forever. It was picturesque, almost idyllic, but something about it felt heavy, as if the air carried more than just humidity. Her house was as I remembered it, a wooden structure raised on stilts, with creaky floorboards and windows that rattled in the wind. I spent the first day sorting through her belongings, finding relics of a life steeped in tradition, an old keris blade, jars filled with strange herbs, and talismans carved from wood. Among them was a small, handwritten book filled with notes and instructions. It was a sort of guide to the village's customs and beliefs. One page caught my attention: Rules for the Night. It listed warnings I'd heard before, but one line was underlined: Do not whistle after dark. I chuckled to myself. Was this really something people still believed? But as night fell and the jungle sounds intensified, the warning felt less amusing. Crickets chirped in a rhythmic drone, and the occasional distant howl of a wild dog made me jump. I told myself I was just on edge from being alone in an unfamiliar place. To shake off the unease, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to explore the area around the house. The village's dirt paths were deserted. Most houses were dark, their inhabitants having gone to bed early. My footsteps echoed eerily, the sound swallowed by the thick jungle that encroached on the edges of the village. Without thinking, I started to whistle a tune. A habit, really. Something to fill the silence. The effect was immediate. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. The crickets stopped chirping, and even the wind died down. I paused mid-whistle, unnerved by the sudden silence. Then faintly, I heard it, a whistle mimicking mine, coming from deep within the trees. I froze. The sound was distant but unmistakable. My rational mind tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just an echo or another villager playing a prank. I decided to head back to the house, but the moment I turned around, I heard it again. This time, it was closer. A chill ran down my spine. I quickened my pace, the flashlight's beam trembling in my hand. As I approached the house, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. My eyes darted toward the tree line, but all I could see was darkness. Back inside, I locked the doors and windows. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But as I lay in bed, the whistling started again. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rustling of the trees. Then it grew louder, circling the house. The sound wasn't quite right. It was off-pitch, uneven, like someone who didn't know how to whistle, trying their best to imitate me. I wanted to believe it was a prank. Maybe some kid from the village had heard me earlier and decided to mess with me. But who would wander the jungle at night just to scare a stranger? Sleep was impossible. I stayed up, clutching the keris I'd found earlier, the blade's hilt slick with sweat from my trembling hands. The whistling continued until dawn, fading only when the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon. The next day, I visited the village elder, an old woman named Ibu Sari. She lived in a small hut, adorned with charms and offerings. When I mentioned the whistling, her face darkened. "You ignored the warning," she said, her voice trembling. "The whistling invites them." "Invites who?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "The spirits of the jungle," she whispered. "The Penjaga. They mimic the living to lure you into their realm. If you follow their call, you may never return." Her words sent a shiver through me. I tried to explain it away, saying it was probably just an animal or a prank, but she shook her head. "You must make amends," she said, handing me a bundle of herbs and a small carved charm. "Burn these at the edge of the jungle tonight. Apologize. Do not look into the trees." That night, as the village settled into an uneasy quiet, I followed her instructions. Standing at the tree line, I lit the bundle of herbs, the smoke curling into the air with an acrid scent. I muttered an apology, feeling foolish and terrified in equal measure. The jungle was silent, but I felt it watching me. My eyes stayed fixed on the ground, resisting the urge to look into the shadows. Then from deep within the trees, I heard it again, the whistling. It was my tune, distorted and wrong, growing louder with each passing second. Panic set in. I dropped the burning herbs and sprinted back to the house, slamming the door behind me. The whistling didn't stop. It circled the house, coming from all directions at once. I clutched the charm Ibusari had given me, praying for it to end. And then, as abruptly as it started, the whistling ceased. The silence was deafening. I sat in the middle of the room, every muscle tensed, until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. The next morning, Ibusari came to check on me. She seemed relieved to find me alive, but warned that I wasn't safe yet. "You must leave," she said. "The Penjaga do not forgive easily." I didn't need convincing. I packed my bags and left that same day, my heart heavy with guilt and fear. As the car drove me away from the village, I glanced back one last time. In the distance, just beyond the tree line, I thought I saw a figure. Tall and thin, it stood unnaturally still, watching me leave. Then it raised a hand to its mouth and whistled. I've been back in the city for weeks now, but the experience haunts me. Every night I'm plagued by the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, just as I'm about to drift off to sleep, I hear it again. Faint, distant, and unmistakable. The whistling. The night air in my grandmother's village always felt heavier than in the city. It clung to my skin, filled with the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and the faint aroma of frangipani flowers. Grandma's house stood at the edge of the jungle, the kind of place where the trees seemed to whisper secrets among themselves. I had come here to visit her after years of living abroad. She was thrilled to see me, but even the warmth set with unease. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the jungle turned into a wall of blackness, Grandma pulled me aside. "Remember, don't go outside after dark," she said, her voice low and urgent. "If you hear crying, no matter how close it sounds, you stay inside. And if you smell frangipani at night, you pray." I laughed it off, thinking it was one of those old village superstitions. But her expression was stone serious. She leaned closer, her wrinkled hand clutching my wrist. "The Pontianak is not a myth," she whispered. "She hunts the careless." I nodded to appease her, but I didn't think much of it. After dinner, I stayed up scrolling through my phone, ignoring the occasional rustle from the jungle. By midnight, the power went out. Grandma had warned me it might happen, so I lit the kerosene lamp she'd left on the table. The soft glow gave the room a strangely comforting warmth, though the jungle outside looked more menacing in the flickering light. That's when I heard it, a faint, high-pitched cry. At first I thought it was a bird or some nocturnal animal, but as I listened closer it became unmistakable, a woman weeping. It wasn't far either. My stomach tightened as I remembered Grandma's warning. I stood frozen, my ears straining. The crying grew louder, more desperate, as if the woman were approaching the house. I told myself it had to be a villager or someone lost in the jungle. My conscience gnawed at me until I decided to look. I grabbed the lamp and stepped out onto the veranda, the humid night wrapping around me like a shroud. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The crying stopped instantly. The silence was deafening. Even the crickets had gone quiet. And then I smelled it, a sweet cloying scent that made my stomach churn. Frangipani. The air turned cold, unnaturally so for the tropics. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned to go back inside. That's when I saw her. She was standing under the mango tree, her back to me. Her long black hair cascaded down her back, and she wore a white dress stained with something dark. She wasn't crying anymore, just standing there, perfectly still. "Are you okay?" I asked, though my voice cracked. She didn't respond. Every instinct screamed at me to go inside, but I couldn't look away. Slowly, she began to turn. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, as though her joints didn't work properly. When I saw her face, my breath caught in my throat. Her skin was pale as the moon, her lips stretched into a cruel smile that revealed sharp, blood-stained teeth. But her eyes were the worst, empty black pits that seemed to suck the light out of the world. She tilted her head and let out a low, guttural laugh. I stumbled back, dropping the lamp. The glass shattered, and the flames sputtered out, plunging me into darkness. Panic took over, and I bolted into the house, slamming the door behind me. My hands fumbled for the latch, locking it just as something heavy thudded against the wood. Her laughter came again, louder this time, as though she were mocking my fear. The door shook violently, and I backed away, heart hammering in my chest. "Pray," I whispered to myself, remembering Grandma's advice. But no prayer came to mind. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, my body paralyzed with terror. The banging stopped. I held my breath, listening. The silence stretched on, unbearable, until I heard a soft tap, tap, tap on the window behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I twisted my head. She was there, her face pressed against the glass, her hollow eyes staring straight into mine. Her smile widened, and I saw her lips moving, though no sound came out. I screamed, stumbling backward into the table. The kerosene lamp tipped over, spilling fuel onto the floor. The spark ignited, flames spreading across the wooden planks. The fire cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, and for a moment, I thought I saw her inside the room with me. Her laughter echoed around me as I grabbed a bucket of water and doused the flames. When I looked up, she was gone. Grandma found me the next morning, curled up in a corner, clutching the charred remains of the kerosene lamp. She didn't scold me or ask what had happened. She just looked at me with a knowing sadness. "You saw her," she said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. "She doesn't leave once she's found you." Grandma continued. "You'll have to leave the village, and even then." She didn't finish the sentence. I packed my bags and left that same day. But the scent of frangipani followed me. Sometimes I hear faint crying in the dead of night, no matter where I am. And when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I swear I see her standing behind me, smiling that terrible smile. I never believed in ghosts or spirits. Growing up in Phnom Penh, I heard plenty of stories about them from my grandparents, but they always felt like fairy tales meant to keep children obedient. That all changed last year, when I visited a remote village in the Kampong Cham province. I was there to document traditional Khmer crafts for a photography project. The village was picturesque, surrounded by endless rice fields and dense bamboo groves. The locals were friendly but cautious, especially when I mentioned I wanted to explore the groves. "Do not wander into the bamboo at night," an old man warned me, his milky eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "The forest doesn't forgive the curious." I dismissed his words with a polite nod, chalking them up to local superstition. On my second night in the village, I couldn't sleep. The air in my hut was stifling, and the distant croak of frogs was oddly hypnotic. I decided to take a walk, thinking the cool night air might help. The bamboo grove was only a short distance away, and curiosity pulled me toward it like a magnet. The grove was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. The towering bamboo swayed gently in the breeze, their stalks creaking like ancient bones. I ventured deeper, snapping photos as I went. The light from my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the pale green of the bamboo and the occasional flutter of leaves. I didn't realize how far I'd gone until I could no longer see the village lights. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. And then I heard it, a faint whisper. So soft, I thought I'd imagined it. I froze, straining my ears. The whisper came again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, speaking in a language I didn't understand. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The whispering stopped, replaced by the rustle of leaves. My flashlight flickered, plunging me into brief darkness. When the beam returned, I saw her. She was standing between the bamboo stalks, her long dark hair obscuring her face. She wore a tattered white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Are you okay?" I asked, taking a hesitant step forward. She didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head, her movements unnervingly slow. I couldn't explain why, but dread gripped me. I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The woman stepped forward, her bare feet silent against the forest floor. As she moved, I caught a glimpse of her face through the curtain of hair. Her eyes were black voids, her mouth twisted into a smile that stretched too wide. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run. The bamboo seemed to close in around me, the paths twisting and doubling back on themselves. No matter which way I went, the whispering followed, growing louder, more insistent. I tripped over a root and fell hard, my flashlight rolling away. As I scrambled to retrieve it, the whispering became a low, guttural growl. I turned to see the woman crawling toward me, her limbs contorting unnaturally. Her hands clawed at the earth, her smile widening impossibly. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at her, but the beam seemed to have no effect. "Leave me alone," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. She stopped abruptly, her head snapping to one side. Her voice, soft and melodic, filled the air. "You shouldn't have come here." The words sent chills down my spine. In a flash, she vanished, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness. I don't remember how I found my way out of the grove. The villagers found me at dawn, collapsed at the edge of the bamboo, my clothes torn and my camera missing. When I told them what I'd seen, their faces grew grim. "You met the app," the old man said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "She was a woman who died, unjustly, her spirit bound to the bamboo. She lures the curious to share her pain." I left the village that same day, but I've never been the same. Shadows linger longer in my peripheral vision, and I hear whispers when I'm alone. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see her face, smiling, waiting for me to return.